Oh yeah, this is the ultimate lazy podcast.
Power stance. It's like you're T-posing.
All right, man.
Okay, so since you've joined the bar, has it changed your view on the state at large?
I don't know. It's hard to explain. Obviously, as a lawyer and a member of the Law Society, I'm clearly to some degree an agent of the government and a officer of the court. So to a degree, it has. I've come from what I would like to kind of classify as a paleo-libertarian background, moving more into kind of the role of a minarchist, more for practical purposes than for ideological purposes. But that doesn't mean to say that I think that despite the fact that I don't necessarily think that a monopoly over justice is a good thing, I do think that there is a role for a healthy judiciary in a country that is a liberal democracy.
They would get in my way of stomping commies, though. So they got to go.
Well,
the libertarian to fascist pipeline's got it. Like it's got to exist. Question is, does it go away once we all become fascist? Do we ever go back?
Like what? Go back to being paleo-libertarians?
Yeah, all this social harmony's like we got to get rid of it.
It's pretty tough.
Now that we've physically removed all the undesirables, we should just go back to just getting along.
Well,
through voluntary means.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to get along, but clearly people are going to have run into situations, whether we're in a publicly driven state-run market, if you even want to call it a market, or something more akin to pure capitalism and voluntary mutual exchange, where people are going to run into issues, whether that's breach of contract or, bad faith or negligence or dealings that embroil people in disputes that need adjudication from a third party. And do I think that the public mechanism for the adjudication of disputes would be more efficient than that of the government-run monopolistic judicial system? I think so, and I think that we're seeing, and that we've always seen many examples of people privately adjudicating disputes or having disputes resolved by having the parties essentially elect voluntarily some third party to mitigate, mediate, or resolve these disputes. And I don't know. I think that I'm divided on the system that we have in Canada to appoint judges. I am a firm believer that many of the judges, and I would carefully say that a majority of the jurists, especially in Alberta, they're clearly intellectuals. They're usually distinguished lawyers, and I think that a lot of the decisions that come from the bench in Alberta, and to a degree in Canada, are good decisions. And we're all human. I think that a lot of the judges feel a duty to adjudicate fairly. And I mean, that process can be tainted by political advocacy, as we sometimes see maybe with appointments to the Supreme Court.
I don't think judges have ever actually, in recent memory, have suffered the scorn of political public office as it pertains to rulings from the bench. We've had 2 judges get some serious shit for comments that they made, but not for rulings that they've made. Do you know what I'm saying? So there was that a professor of law at the U of C, who was basically like, oh, she's a giant. I think it was a lady. She's a giant racist because she used the term scary black man or big black scary criminal. And there was that judge who asked the woman whether she had tried to close her legs. And that had a mistrial. They reran it. So it wasn't necessarily their findings that people had political problems with. They were like, these people are bad.
Yeah, so I mean, there was definitely public scorn there. I'm not familiar with the first example. The second example, I'm definitely familiar with it, and I mean, I think I've got to approach this tactfully. I mean, I think at the end of the day, a judge's role isn't necessarily to sit back and just be a passive observer in court proceedings in Canada. In the civil system in continental Europe, it's often more seen. Their judicial system is more of it's more of an inquisition, and not so much in the the Inquisition of the Catholic Church,
The
like
Spanish.
yeah. So
Yeah.
but it's more of like a fact-finding collective effort, or at least it's supposed to be, to uncover or reveal the truth. Where in Canada, much like in everything else in society, we kind of take a little bit from the Americans, who are fairly hardline adversarial, but we also adopt some of the more fact-finding, inquisitive, the collective search for truth that is prevalent in the continental system. So, when a judge asks a question of a witness, they're entitled to do that. And judges often, and I've got a breadth of experience in chambers and in proper proceedings where there's voir dire evidence, which is just basically people giving oral evidence in court, where the judges step in to potentially ask questions or to engage in lines of questionings where counsel have failed to explore that area of questioning. And I think that that's appropriate. The comment itself, my guess is that it was definitely a poor choice.
I think it was wording. I think most of the time you could figure out what he was going at was, how did you fight back, and to what means did you fight back? Like,
Yeah, and-
at the time, because there's a scenario in which someone has, what might be a sexual assault later, depending on circumstances. And they would just be like, you know what? I kind of think I just got raped. And they're like, well, were you into it at the time? They're like, oh, at the time I was fucking way into it. Like, I was totally into it. But looking back at it, I was coerced. There was a power dynamic problem. I was totally raped. So
Yeah, and you see that, and I think we all can read between the lines as to what the judge was getting at, how he approached that, and how he directed. He definitely worded that question improperly. I think that was a mistake, and the political backlash, was it deserved? Well, I mean, probably. There's also a certain level of decorum in Canadian courtrooms that I really respect and appreciate. You perhaps, during some of the proceedings, I know that you witnessed a recent proceeding in federal court. You obviously, are familiar with the fact that Canadian lawyers in courtrooms refer to opposing counsel as my friend.
yeah.
And of course, justices at the Court of Queen's Bench, or at some of the higher courts in Canada, we refer to them as my lord or my lady, or your lordship or your ladyship, depending on kind of their status. In provincial court, we refer to them as your honor. Really funny, and I think that your listeners may get a bang out of this, and I always think this is really funny. I was in morning chambers one day, right?
Yeah.
And we in Alberta, we've got a particular judge called a master, and all they pretty much do is they deal with the day-to-day morning chambers kind of interlocutory procedural applications that kind of pepper wider proceedings, right? So whenever you have a trial, you have to have a judge run the trial. But, let's say like I'm trying to get documents from somebody and they're not giving them to me, and I want to go and get a remedy and like get a court order, like, okay, give me that stuff. You got to give that to me.
Okay.
I'd go into master's chambers, right? And you get a bunch of self-reps who aren't familiar with the system. And I remember being in morning chambers one day, and like this guy stands up and he calls the master Your Majesty. And and I mean, like, and it's kind of amazing because obviously he's trying to show respect and deference to the court, but he's not, obviously familiar with kind of like the parlance and the convention. And a master, you call them sir or ma'am, or master. That's, they're not your honor. And you see, basically, because we've been so, inundated with American legal TV and everything, most self-reps and people just kind of call all judges
Your Honor,
Your Honor, right?
Yeah.
So for him to call this particular master Your Majesty, and the judges, they've got a great sense of humor about it. Like, he didn't correct him, or he didn't, like, he wasn't condescending or anything like that. I mean, it's just kind of part and parcel, but I always got a big bang out of that. Just
do you think our politeness comes from the fact that you guys have to wear funny uniforms to practice law?
So that's kind of another misconception.
I did just watch a federal court system where the judge was wearing some Old Navy. She didn't bust out the regalia. There was like our Supreme Court dresses like Santa Claus.
Oh yeah. I mean, that all that stuff comes from the British system, like the House of Lords, the Privy Council, some of the more kind of traditional judicial garb of kind of like yesteryear that's still in Canada. I mean, they've given up wigs in Canada. So I remember, here's another great story, and you're going to laugh at this. So when I was in law school, I went to law school out in the United Kingdom, where they still have to, during trials, they still have to wear barrister's robes with the tabs and like the shirt with a short collar. I mean, they kind of look like wizards' capes, but they're like the black robes, and they still have to wear wigs, right? So the justice will wear this like really long, the curly wig, like when you think of the American Civil War, the Revolution,
or aristocrats.
Oh, totally. And it's like, it's got flowing curls and everything. And the barristers,
it's brocaded.
Yeah, and I mean, it's supposed to show like it is kind of like a pious element to it and all that sort of stuff. The barristers wear these little like caps, so they don't quite cover your whole head, and they got like this little ponytail thing on the end. And when I first got to law school, I was like, oh my God, I kind of felt like I was at Oxford, and I wasn't at Oxford, but I kind of felt like, okay, I'm here. I gotta like,
I'm at the show.
Oh, I'm at the show. So we went to the High Court and we're watching a whole bunch of stuff, and we were watching the case of the stolen kebab. And what had happened is this fairly large dude. He was a regular patron of a particular kebab joint. And one night, I guess he was drunk, and he went in and decided to help himself to a kebab. And he like went behind the counter, and he was like cutting his own meat. And
Your Honor, I would call this a kebab emergency.
It was the most ridiculous case I've ever seen. And we were the only ones in the gallery. Like, clearly nobody cared. And the only people there were the accused, which was the big fat guy.
Yeah.
And the prosecutor and defense counsel, and then of course the judge, right? And I mean, if it wasn't a serious, I mean, this guy probably was looking at some sort of penalty for
theft under 5,000.
Oh, I mean,
enter stuff like that.
Maybe like whatever they have in the UK. I think they've got some pretty peculiar stuff in the UK. So anyway,
he had a license but not a permit.
So he was testifying, and he's like, this guy was my buddy. I thought he wouldn't mind, all that kind of stuff. Right? It was late at night, and I guess anyway, but it was clearly a big deal, and they brought a case, and the prosecutor was cross-examining him, and it was asking him. He was like, sir, you're a fairly large girth. Do you expect the court to believe that you weren't hungry for a kebab at 2:00 in the morning? And I thought, we were like kind of trying not to laugh because it was kind of a ridiculous case that was given this like paramount-y importance, right?
Yeah.
And all this formality and all that sort of stuff. And what was really funny is the defense counsel stood up, and his little ponytail was flipped up in the back, and no one really knew, but it's supposed to be down.
Yeah.
And he finished the whole case with this, like, his wig was kind of like flipped up in the back, and it just looked kind of goofy.
Yeah.
And what we also
It's how the ladies know I'm a rebel. It's the legal equivalent to wearing your hat backwards.
it could be.
Yeah.
It could be. I mean, well, the judge didn't correct him, and I mean, they have a wigging room where they actually and they bring these wigs, and like they're not cheap. Like I've looked, they're like $1,200 for these wigs. They're made of horsehair or something, and so in Canada we've dropped the wigs.
Okay.
And to a degree, but we still have to robe whenever you're in a hearing where there's going to be voir dire evidence, which is people giving evidence in the witness box. Okay. And it's I'm a fan of the tradition. Like I don't call the witness box the stand like they do in the States, and of course a lot of people call it that in Canada, even lawyers. But I still call it the witness box.
Yeah.
And I still think that there's something cool about putting on those robes because you've got a duty to not so much the state, but to the spirit of justice. And when you put on those robes, you are you're an officer of justice, or at least I would like to think so. Now, in morning chambers, like where that guy called the judge Your Majesty, you can wear suits, and that's typically what happens. So yeah, there's been a degree of an informality that's been kind of applied to the practice of Canadian law, but there's also an element of tradition, and I think one thing that people are always surprised about when they see that we are in an adversarial system, but you see opposing counsel calling people my friend. Mm-hmm. There really is a degree of professional cordiality, I would like to think, mostly in Canadian law, that you might not necessarily get with, quote unquote, the like ambulance chasing guys down in the States who are like, I got to get my man no matter what, even if I'm disrespectful to counsel. And one thing that I learned very quickly in my career is when I came out of the gate, I was hot and heavy, and I was a pretty hardcore advocate. And I learned really quick that you run into the same counsel over and over, and a degree of professional courtesy can go both a long way for the facilitation of the legal process as a whole, and for cooperation. I mean, if for example, if opposing counsel has
sounds to me like you're getting a little too cozy with the crown, sir.
Well, no, I'm mostly a civil guy, so like I'm usually fighting
just a prick, like go in there and mash him.
I mean, and sometimes you have that, and I mean, to a certain degree, like if you fail to notify a guy of like an application, except on like the eve of the application, it's like sharp. They call it sharp practice, and it's frowned upon, and it's even. It could even be sanctionable. So in Canada, we've got a degree of cordiality and professionalism and respect, I think, that is lacking in some of these systems from other countries.
So you have been predominantly fighting mass bylaw tickets, Alberta health and safety infractions over the past 6 months. Do you think that ends up causing a little bit of untowardness by prosecution or judges, specifically from the fact that they're either fucking tired of every single one of these chicken shit tickets getting fought? Like, imagine you're sitting around doing your job, and all of a sudden 500 to 1,000 jaywalking tickets come across your bench, and you're like, oh my God, why didn't they just fucking pay this? This is a nuisance. This is obnoxious. But it's clearly for the greater good, because we really got to cut down on jaywalking. It's an epidemic of jaywalking out there, and it's really putting people at risk. So like, if I'm a prosecutor or if I'm a judge and I have so many of these come across my bench or across my desk, and I see the same face across from me every day on the same, like, new fight, new person, and I'm frustrated because, like, I thought I was going to save the world. I thought I was going to mete out justice. I thought I was going to, pursue the interest of the people, of society, of myself. And here I am fighting the same goddamn jaywalking ticket versus the same asshole that keeps coming in here and fighting it like it's a murder trial. And I go, you know what, man? Just like, look, can you just fucking plead these out? And he's like, no.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's elements of public policy that are clearly important to the government. The judiciary and the Crown Prosecution Service, are obviously supposed to be their own distinct, entities, right? So, and that's an important function of the rule of law. And the main feature of that is what's called prosecutorial discretion. So you don't want the cops charging and then prosecuting. You want to have a separate agency that can evaluate the charges and make their own determination as to whether or not they actually want to prosecute and the manner in which they prosecute these charges.
Who exercises that discretion?
The Crown. So that's
as an entity, but there's got to be a board or a group within the Crown, an org.
Yeah, so I mean they've got a leadership, and it's my understanding, and I could be mistaken, but I think that there is like a Crown prosecutorial kind of like procedure guideline that they follow, and I don't know because I'm not I've never worked for the Crown Prosecution Service, but I know that there is still a hierarchy, right? So
Okay.
An articling student, and they're all lawyers, an articling student at the Crown Prosecution Service will take marching orders from maybe like the leader of their region, of their prosecutorial region. And one thing that I've learned, because I am a civil guy and I'm mostly concerned myself with a whole bunch of other matters, and typically I'm against other private lawyers, not government lawyers. Getting into COVID litigation and administrative and public law has been kind of an interesting experience because you're dealing with a completely different animal than dealing with the guy who broke your fence or the guy who's got, he's got a shed in his backyard and it's encroaching on your property line.
It's public law, not private law.
That's right. And there are clearly, we're all human beings. So, there's human beings on both ends making decisions. The Crown have been basically appointed or hired. It's my understanding by the Department of Justice and the Solicitor General of each province. And then, of course, federally, it's probably under the Ministry of Justice or whatever it is, to make these decisions. And I think that they come up from the top. They should be separate from the government. The government should not give marching orders to the Crown Prosecution Service. The executive must be separate from the executive. However, recently, especially in Alberta, there were rumors, or at least articles that I read, where Minister Shandro had directed or maybe implied that the Crown Prosecution Service should go after high-profile offenders.
Everybody did that, though.
Well, I mean, but I mean, this was
the mayor did that. Jason Kenney did that.
Yeah, of course.
Every journalist in Alberta. Every concerned citizen, every letter to the editor, every radio show host, everybody said, these don't work. You want to know why they don't work? Because you don't enforce them.
Well, so yeah, and that's the problem is there's a bunch of balancing competing interests here, right? So okay, so we've got this pandemic. And we've got, people who are, allegedly flouting the laws or engaging in civil disobedience and breaking the law. And you've got the Alberta Health Service who are doing inspections. If they find infractions, because, and this is pursuant to the Public Health Act, they call in law enforcement. Law enforcement lays charges and collects evidence. And then the Crown Prosecution Service is responsible for prosecuting these charges. And so it's a multi-tiered system, and they all have obviously different competing interests as well.
But like since AHS is technically the department that's initiating this, in like all plays run back to this department. It does give the intuitive sense that AHS itself
is running these files.
Not only that, they're the client. They're the aggrieved party for the prosecutor.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I mean, the Crown Prosecution Service acts for the public, right? So, and it could be argued, or at least it's the position of Alberta Health Service that they act for the public as well, right? I mean, theoretically, all these government guys are supposed to be acting in the public interest. I mean, on the flip side, I would say that engaging in civil disobedience to affect policy change against or to raise the alarm against government overreach, I think that that's in the public interest as well. So again, competing interests.
Which I have a is there such thing as, because we're as cultural hand-me-downs from the United States.
We're a blend. We are.
Like, we know, but like I'm saying, the average person knows exactly. They're like, oh, a DA, and I know what it like. Why do I know what an ADA is? There's no reason for me to know that. There's no such thing as that in my system.
That's because you watch too much The Practice, which is the best show on the face of the planet.
Like we're steeped in that kind of lore, but like when we look at our own system, like, and because I don't know shit, and I'm I bump up against the legal system in media, not anywhere else, because I'm a better criminal than most people.
Are you, though?
I just don't get caught.
Well, that's good.
And
I mean, here is something that's interesting, and I should probably interject here, is, I mean, at the end of the day, in every way, I don't think there's anybody in Canada that can escape running afoul of the law, period. Whether that's breaching regulatory stuff like, speeding on green, or, like any of this stuff, right? Like, yeah. I think that the quote unquote, the book that they throw at you is so thick and so dense that, I mean, really, if there is a need or maybe a desire to, that anybody can be that potentially evidence of a violation of a law could potentially be found.
So do you think, like, why do you think a legal system makes room for the idea of discretion?
Well, because, I mean...
but the law's there. Enforce it.
Yeah, well, of course. And that's one of the issues, right? Is if a law is not enforced, kind of gets towards that area of being, maybe arbitrary. And, I mean, I would propose that, it'd probably take an enormous amount of resources, but to maybe have somebody, some government lawyers, instead of adding to these laws, cleaning them up so that they're more concise and so that they're more transparent. And that's, again, one of the features of that is supposed to be one of the characteristics of the rule of law, is clear and transparent laws that are accessible to everybody. And we start running afoul of the rule of law when there are secret rules, rules that you can't understand, are arbitrary, capricious, or are incapable of being unilaterally or equally applied to people, or where there's just a million laws and they don't really have a public reason. So and to a degree, I think that we're already there. I mean, the law is tremendously cumbersome, and this is why we have lawyers. I mean, and I think that it's kind of crazy that there's a whole profession that is just geared to arguing and trying to interpret the things that the legislative bodies have written down to try to govern our society. And that's not to say that we don't need laws. Without laws, we don't have civilization. And laws should stem from what I would consider to be the natural order of mankind in the way that we interact with one another. And of course, there's different takes on that. I mean, if you lived in the Soviet Union, I mean, I would say that there was probably no rule of law there, but there were definitely a lot of rules, and there were laws.
There's Ray Kurzweil wrote an entire book about how completely fucked up legally and ethically we're going to be within the next 40 years, called Souls of the New Machine. And it challenges even basic things like property rights, in the sense that if we have virtual instantiations of ourselves and we back them up and they're dormant, that's still our property. We're like paying rent on that storage. But the second we instantiate it, is it a person again? Like we're gonna run up into technological problems that just turn natural law onto its head. But like right now, like I don't think this like game of Calvin Ball the legal system has turned into is going to be able to deal with. Like we see
I think
that,
it will. So let's just revisit the topic of prosecutorial discretion, because I think that's important. When you've got a system where, when you breathe, you're probably breaking some law somewhere.
yeah.
The system has a finite amount of resources. There's an element of equity that needs to be brought to the application of the cold hard law, right? So if we just have all these laws, and if you break them, there's going to be some giant AI that come and scoops you up, no one will be around, right?
Yeah.
So there's got to be an element of humanity in the enforcement of laws for a reason. And then if laws are enforced, and if there's, potentially a punishment behind it, and specifically referring to regulatory or criminal stuff, that that the punishment is proportional to the infringement. And it's, I mean, my ideology and political beliefs aside, we start to get into a pretty crazy spot when when disproportionality kind of gets out of whack, and all these things are characteristics of a fair and just system, and we're all humans. We're all trying to get along and work together, and a monopolistic judiciary that's basically run by the government. I think that there's there could be significant issues there with bias and motive, and when people are only receiving. And I discussed this at length in a recent documentary in which I was interviewed, where when you are paid by one when you are paid by an entity or an organization, you're the benefactor specifically because they've paid you, and it creates a bias. And whether or not you act on that bias might be different, but if you're receiving all your cash from one guy and you are now adjudicating on a dispute between that guy and someone else, is there an apprehension of bias? I would argue that there is. And when we discussed at the start of this, kind of the root of justice and adjudication. And I think that there is already a robust and thriving private adjudication kind of mechanism out there. And you see this with divorce mediators who, instead of going to the court in order to save money, and even if people are represented by counsel, so let's say, two people get divorced, and, they've got some minor disagreements, but they don't necessarily want to go through the rigmarole of what is admittedly a cumbersome, expensive, and completely inefficient court service. And I'm happy to say that because I deal with the courts on a day-to-day basis. And, frankly, they're trying their best with limited resources. So the blame isn't entirely on, the actors in the judicial system.
They have no feedback mechanism.
Well, of course, yeah. So there's no profit loss mechanism, and that creates a big problem, right? So
I can't just take my money elsewhere.
Yeah, so that's endemic with, that's kind of a characteristic of a lot of government institutions. But people will go to a private mediator, and they'll be like, okay, Samantha Smith, she's great. She's beyond reproach. She's never taken a bribe. She's developed a business and developed a private reputation for being fair, no matter what is put in front of her. And
both parties agree. We're all happy.
Yeah. And I mean, frankly, in many cases, it's cheaper. I've been involved in a whole bunch of construction disputes. So I run a robust general practice, and construction disputes are horrible.
Yeah.
Right? Because usually you got either a crooked contractor who's done a horrible job and you got to prove it, or you got a client who hasn't paid, and they're blaming everything on the contractor, and they're nitpicking everything, right? So typically you've got these relatively low value, and we're not talking about big developments, but relatively like low value cases where, the parties can end up spending an absolute fortune going to court and adjudicating it. I've actually had to seek out arbitrators, like private arbiters, in the construction field. And I'm not going to lie, they're still fairly expensive, but in many cases they can be cheaper than the courts. But the benefit is that the arbitrator and the parties can craft the rules into which they are entering to adjudicate the dispute. Whereas when you're adjudicating in court, you're bound by, the general rules of court, right? Yeah. So there's flexibility in the private market, and I think it's a thriving business.
Yeah. Do you think there is going to be a larger effort to do widespread kind of crowdsourced legal initiatives?
Oh man,
it's a pretty successful model for those that got in.
Yeah,
and people donated because they love. They're just like, I disagree with it. I'm putting my money on the only horse I can, which is the legal system, because my politicians aren't, they're not enforcing my will, or they're enforcing the will of the majority. And I, sitting here in the minority, have resources, and I'm going to give it my Obi-Wan is, the legal system. Okay, they'll save me.
Yeah, so let's break down the issue specifically with the Public Health Act, the masking tickets, or you've opened your restaurant when you're not supposed to, or you've taken part in a protest and you're not social distancing, right? So there's public policy to be like, okay, well, we can't let people get away with this because it runs contrary to the policy of, lockdowns or whatever. I have
everybody and their dog on my ass that I have to go and enforce this and put you in jail.
Yeah. And so this is the catch-22 though. Okay. And I did a little bit of math, and this is what's really interesting is, obviously there's a policy to be like, okay, well, writing tickets looks good in the media because it looks like we're enforcing it, right? We got the cops writing tickets, but now you've got to prosecute them. And unless we live in a dictatorship where we've got, kind of like star chamber courts, or we just avoid trials altogether, and the cops get to just chuck you in jail and throw away the key. If everybody is afforded a right to due process, there has to be and this to a degree is the profit loss mechanism, and maybe not profit loss, but maybe it's the the benefit detriment balance, right? So here's a good example. So okay, I've opened my restaurant, and this is even better. So I went into a Safeway, let's just say, and of course I'm not talking personally, this is just a hypothetical, but so I go into Safeway and I'm not wearing a mask, and they give me a ticket, okay?
Yep.
And the ticket's $150 or $250 or whatever. Okay, now they want to prosecute me. Well, most people don't have the cash to obviously hire counsel to run that file, right? So, frankly, if I was giving a masking ticket, I've got better things to do in my life than, for $250, I probably just like a speeding ticket. If I get a speeding ticket, I don't fight it. Some people do. Unless it's completely egregious, I don't fight it. I just pay it because I've got better things to do in my life than, getting embroiled in the court system. However, when you've got civil liberties projects that are engaging lawyers to actually challenge these en masse, it creates a huge burden on the state. Again, another great example is someone who opens a restaurant, right? So breaches of the Public Health Act for opening a restaurant when you're supposed to be closed, most of those tickets were $1,200, okay? And for most people...
that's pretty cheap.
Well, I mean, I think that's still a pretty, for a lot of people who are,
it stings.
Here's an issue: is if you're going under unless you open, sure, because you run like a little news stand or something, or like a little diner or something, and you got nothing left to lose, like that $1,200 could break you. And in fact, because of the pandemic, you probably don't even have $1,200 anyway, and that's the reason why you're open. So now they write these tickets, and now the judiciary, or I should say the Crown Prosecution Service, has to actually go and service these tickets and fight them. So if there's a robust civil defense that's provided, and this is one of the initiatives that I've been lucky enough to be a part of, is we've come up with a system where we can still make money, and we run these files for, a lot of people think that it's very expensive. And that's one of the big misconceptions, is that there's all this money, coming into our law office, and we're just making out like bandits on this thing.
You're profiting off of this.
Yeah. I mean, frankly, we run these files for a flat fee, which is great.
flat rate.
Yeah, and you know what? Each particular step along the way, there's multiple triggers for payment. So like there's a trigger for the first payment and so forth. And I'm not going to get into the details of that, but we've developed a system to make it cost effective where we still make money and run them en masse in order to run these files.
Yeah.
And again, we don't act for the party that is providing the funds. We act for the individual client. So although we're receiving money typically from civil rights organizations, as soon as we are retained for the interests of the client exclusively, as though they had come and hired us by looking us up on Google.
Yeah.
And that's very important, is we are not politically motivated to serve the organization or the civil rights organization that is funding these initiatives. We're acting for the clients. And we've got a little system to do it with some vigor and a little bit of pizzazz behind it. Now, if you look at the actual process of running one of these COVID trials, okay, so we've run a couple. And, the court will be like, okay, well, it's like a ticket. It's like a parking ticket. It's $1,200. But, I mean, in order to prosecute it, you still have to prove the offense. Whether you've run a red light or whether you've committed an egregious murder or something, the Crown still has the burden of proving the elements of the offense in order to get a punishment from the court. So they have to... There's got to be cops. There's got to be investigators. They got to do all this work. All those guys are getting paid.
Yeah.
And then that's before the charge is even laid. So now they laid the charge. Now there's a crown prosecutor. Now there's a crown prosecutor that's got to do it. So and then they've got to review, make sure that there's enough evidence where on the face of it they think that there's actually like a prima facie case that they can bring. How many hours does that take for $1,200? So and we're just getting into the skin of it. So now they look at it and they go, okay, yeah, we're going to prosecute this case. We plead not guilty and say you got to prove your case.
Yeah.
We want disclosure. You now got to put together all that stuff into a package and send it over so we can look at the evidence. And now we got to run a trial. So in order to have a trial, you got to call in all of the witnesses. So for example, we had one where it was just another one of these restaurants that had stayed open. And they set it down for a half-day trial. Now, a half day in court, it might not seem like a lot, but you've got to reserve a courtroom. There's cleaners to clean the courtroom. There's paper, pens. You've got to have clerks. You've got to have scheduling clerks. You've got to have a crown prosecutor who probably makes $120,000 a year or more. Yeah. You've got to have a judge sitting. You've got to reserve court time. Of course, the client and the defense counsel have to come in, and then the witnesses. So for this one case, it was a diner and a restaurant who stayed open. There were 4 peace officer witnesses and 2 Alberta Health Service inspectors, and just for the prosecution's case, okay. And they all got to come. Whether they give evidence or not, they all got to take them. They all got to take the day. They're all getting paid. They got to sit outside the courtroom, and of course, they give evidence. So we get to noon, and it's supposed to be a half-day trial. The Crown hasn't even gone through half their witnesses, so they call 1 inspector and 2 officers. Yeah. Okay, and now it's a nightmare. And the Crown forgets to conduct a particular part of the trial to establish the voluntariness of the defense's statements, which is a huge problem and kind of a no-no.
Yeah.
So we make an application to just dismiss the whole thing for non-suit, for failure to comply with this process.
Yeah.
And the judge kind of looks at it, and you can tell he's kind of like, okay, well, this is a ticket case, and we are treating this like it's a ticket case. And the whole time, we tell the Crown, look, this is going to be a nightmare. We should just settle this with either a donation or you can withdraw. And we've had a lot of withdrawals because a lot of specifically the regional crowns in rural Alberta have better things to do than be tangling with us.
They're righteously issuing or kind of exercising their discretion.
That's right.
In the name of justice.
Oh God, they're looking at like domestic abuse cases, like, car thefts, like vicious domestic assaults, like in some cases murders. And they're going like, oh my God, I've got a prosecution for some guy that opened up his like little restaurant in this little town. Yeah. Anyway, so we've had a lot withdrawn, but, so for this morning in court, I would estimate that cost the taxpayers, and this is low, probably $50,000, maybe more than that.
Yeah.
So we get to noon, we're done in court. Like, we don't have any more time. So the next step would be to organize another half day to resume the trial. And of course, you don't get to come in tomorrow. You don't get to come in next week. You got to book time. Well, the next available time is like 6 months later for a half day. It's going to take more than a half day. And because we've now made this application to dismiss, Now, the Crown prosecutor has to prepare written responses to our application. The judge has to rule on it. And then even if we're unsuccessful in having it dismissed, now we get to put on the defense, which is a whole nother day.
Yeah.
And you look at all that stuff and you go, okay, well, so they can, let's say we run this whole thing, we put on this like O.J. Simpson murder trial defense and we lose.
Yeah.
The guy's going to get a $1,200 fine. Okay, so this is a microcosm. This is one case.
Yeah.
We are running, and we have run over 120 cases. And at one point, it was my understanding that there were over 800 cases that were actively being prosecuted in a manner that was similar to ours. So now let me do the math for you, okay? So, and I looked this up because I thought it was interesting. I was like, okay, well, $1,200 a ticket. Some of them might be more, some of them might be less. The overall justice budget for Alberta, period, per year, $1.4 billion. Okay, you're like, okay, that's sizable money.
It's got to be in it,
man. Take into account, like, judges are making $250 a year plus pensions. You got clerks at the desk. You got paper. You got computers. You got IT personnel. You got scheduling staff. You got computer systems.
Building security.
Man, it's crazy. Yeah, you got probably maybe, and I don't know how, I'm just guessing, but maybe 100 different judicial buildings and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Admin staff, lawyers, Crown prosecutors. For each one of these files, let's just say that on the low end, we take every one of them to trial and we run them right through. And let's just say on the conservative side, it costs them $100,000 each to prosecute them.
Yeah.
If there's 800 of these, that's $80 million. That's a sizable chunk of the entire budget. So it's not possible for them to do it. Like, and this is not $1.4 billion just to enforce COVID tickets. They're going after murders. They're going after organized crime. They're going after, rapes and sexual assaults.
So do you think that means that the government doesn't actually take enforcement seriously?
Well,
it's clearly not a priority. Jason Kenney has gotten just his knuckles wrapped. Like, he's been fucked up in the media. By you're not funding the teachers. You're not funding the doctors and nurses. They're heroes. There was a stop order for vacations for the nurses. They literally said, you can't take time off. I know you booked it, but we don't have enough. You can't take time off. There's literally a fucking daily update on how many free beds there are in the health system. I haven't heard word one. I've never heard there's only 6 judges. There's only 4 courtrooms free. Yeah, it's a nightmare. The judiciary is in utter disarray. I would contend that the judiciary is in utter disarray with scheduling. So if I set I have a theory on why that is.
Well, it's because it's not sexy and it's not political. It's not really politically motivated.
It's not political.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Judges don't have a union to go out and justify their union dues, to go out and wrap knuckles.
Oh, and thank God they don't.
It doesn't employ enough people. Like, the government is the number, like, pretty much almost in Canada especially, it's like the number 1 employer.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me.
And
well, everyone's tugging at the purse strings, right? So, like, okay, so let's say you, like, capitulate and give the nurses, like, a ton of money.
Yeah.
Maybe the recycling union's going to be like, oh, well, like, what about the environment, man? Like, what about our stuff? And then, okay, you're like, okay, well, these recycling truck drivers, yeah, let's give them a little bit of money. Now the teachers are going to be like, no, but the kids, man, the kids. What about the kids?
Yeah.
And this whole time, for a litigant to try to set down a trial, it takes years and years. So I think you've touched on a point. I don't think that there is a lot of advocacy or, I guess advocacy for the state of the judiciary. And the judiciary just has to make do.
One of the most crucial functions of society.
I think, and I think it is, and I mean, there's a lot of disdain and kind of, people don't like lawyers, like, they just don't.
People don't like pallbearers or funeral directors either.
I like funeral directors. That's a tough job.
Somebody's got to bury the dead,
and someone's got to show compassion to the aggrieved, right?
Yeah. But those guys are freaks. I don't know,
man. I actually was earlier in my life, I was considering becoming a funeral director. I thought it'd be pretty good.
My dad worked at a funeral home for a short stint before he was a cop. And I did some contract work for a funeral chain here in this city, and I was on site one day, and I said I can't be here. I'm just not going to be here. So when they're having services, they have the mic hooked up to the PA system. PA system goes across the whole building.
Yeah.
And I heard an 8-year-old kid eulogize his father, and I was like, I can't be here.
Yeah, I think but it's also like like people who work with, like addicts in pretty like, horrible kind of community outreach stuff where you've got people that are at like, the depths of their life and you've got to have something within, and same with nurses, right?
But they don't get paid like lawyers.
Well, no, and that's true, and I mean, if I can comment on that, I think one of the big issues is, and I mean, and it's debatable. This is more of a commentary and editorializing than anything else, but there's a monopoly in the justice system, and that's one of the issues that drives up the price of representation. Now, in Alberta, we are fairly lucky at the small claims level because we're one of the few provinces, I believe Ontario's another one, where in civil small claims, which are cases where there are damages of under 50,000, you can hire a provincial court agent. They're not a lawyer. They're not even regulated.
Yeah.
And there have been some shady characters, but by and large, the guys that rise to the cream of the crop are experts. We actually work very, very closely with a very reputable and amazing small claims court agent service. And they're great. You don't have to pay a lawyer. The advocacy is almost on par with a lawyer because these guys live in provincial civil court.
Yeah.
And here's another thing. Civil court in Alberta, there's like 6 judges. That's it. In Calgary. I should say in Calgary, not in Alberta. I think there's probably an equal, I think they do circuits and stuff. But the judges know these agents. I mean, and they're respected as part of their job. They get paid. I mean, if the judiciary hates them, they're not going to be able to service their clients or, advocate or represent efficiently. Or effectively. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that when you say, okay, well, there's only so many lawyers per year that can kind of like come out of the bar. And I guess the regulation of the legal industry is one thing. Because I don't know. I also don't know if we
don't want America.
Yeah, like I don't know if we want that either.
But then we'd have sweet Canadian Jim the Hammer Shapiro's.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome.
Texas Law Hawks.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, there's still some kind of corny lawyers out there that have some pretty cheesy sticks, but it's hard to find a lawyer because it's expensive. And in fairness to lawyers, it's not easy work. It's very nuanced. It's very particular. You have to have experience. Like first-year lawyers don't know anything, and you don't come out of law school being an effective advocate. They can teach you about tradition and history and how to interpret, court decisions and potentially but they don't even teach you procedure. You don't even know that when you come out of law school.
Okay. Well, that's why you have to do a article, right?
That's right, and again, I wouldn't necessarily place the blame on lawyers. I would place the blame on a system that is not very transparent. It's very, very complicated and complex.
Esoteric.
It's crazy, and it's not easy to understand, and it's not accessible.
It's almost thaumaturgic, dude. Like it's.
Yeah, I mean, people.
But
also...
at the end of the day, I don't care what kind of money I gotta pay. I have to keep myself. It's my last refuge away from the boot of the state. It's the only recourse I have. Collective action is one thing. You're like, well, maybe we'll change his mind if he sees that this is unpopular. Versus the cold, hard gavel of justice just being like, do it. Like I need my only like way to directly fight the state is through a lawyer.
And I think I mean, democracy's got its shortcomings, and that's very, very clear, right? So, in order to change the government, you've got to vote, and you're one in 38 million of a decision-making power isn't very effective. Is the judiciary independent? Well, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be, but all the judges receive their salary from the same payee.
Yeah.
Crown prosecutors are kind of the same. But there is I would say that there is still an element of independence. And you see that, especially in a specific decision that just came out this week, where a federal court judge overturned a government decision and allowed Rebel News to attend the leadership debates for the second time in a row. If the judiciary was truly ineffective, as a lot of people complain, that never would have happened. It probably wouldn't have even have made it into court. It would have been a mandated decision with no recourse.
I'd probably call Judge Heenahan, Your Majesty.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, you definitely don't want to do that. You especially don't want to butcher her last name either. That doesn't bode well for gaining favor with the court.
So, do you see a future for the next kind of legal battle to be vaccination kind of bylaws? Like, I don't think it'll be as it might be way bigger than the mass lawsuits. But it might also be nothing, because I don't think the government is going to enforce businesses to require that their employees get vaccinated, just that people are vaccinated to enter into a premise or something like that. Like, I think they're going to have a tough time with public offices and unions and stuff like that. But do you think that becomes the next kind of legal frontier for this process?
Well, so it already is the next legal frontier. So we're still dealing with the fallout of the regulatory COVID infractions. We're now dealing with the legal issues surrounding the disclosure of private medical information and using that to affect people's employment rights and other rights. Charter rights, constitutional rights, and everything else. And I think that the parallels to some of the creepier stuff from the early part of the 20th century are extremely apparent on the face of it. And there's already litigation brewing over this. It's relatively new, which they've kind of implemented these policies with extremely short deadlines. And this is the next, the answer is yes. And this is the next frontier. And whether or not each case is going to be fought on an individual basis, that again, to a degree, that's happening. And to kind of sum up what some of the issues are, at least legally speaking, and in terms of human rights legislation, employment legislation, and the disclosure of medical information legislation, there's a bunch of different ways to attack this, and of course the constitutional arguments. The one of the main issues is whether or not if someone has a job and an employer is trying to mandate vaccines upon them under kind of threat of some sort of punishment or disciplinary action if they don't comply. One of the big issues legally is whether or not if they do not, if they're not vaccinated or if they're unwilling to disclose their status, if the employer or the, I suppose whoever's trying to enforce the mandate has reasonable accommodations. So that's one of the big, issues that the court is going to look at. So just to give you two quick examples. Let's say I work for, I sell widgets in a shop, and so the guy says, okay, well, all the employees. The employer goes, okay, all the employees, you've got to have your vaccines, but if you don't, you have to wear a mask.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've been wearing masks all along. They've been government mandated. at the end of the day, allowing somebody an option or an out, whereby that out is reasonable, or what maybe not, and maybe not to what we would consider to be reasonable, but what the courts would be considered to be reasonable. Making someone wear a mask, yeah, it's probably kind of a little uncouth because you're maybe signaling there, like singling a guy out or a gal out because they got to wear masks. But compared to either take this vaccine or you lose your job and your pension.
Yeah.
In terms of procedural fairness and accommodation, one is way further down, further on the scale than the other, and the courts are more likely to sanction the employer that goes, okay, well, if these guys don't wear masks, maybe they got to wear a mask. Or I've seen this as well, where they've segregated non-vaccinated employees on a particular floor of an office tower.
Okay.
And not necessarily whether you're unvaccinated, but just people who have either declared that they're not vaccinated or who have basically refused to provide their vaccination service.
So why do you think it is insurance companies aren't allowed to get that information, but employers are now?
Well, and that's one of the big legal issues that the courts are going to have to tangle with that, right? So, and the courts have a number of mechanisms to deal with that, and this is kind of gets back into some of the stuff that we discussed off air surrounding judges that may be driven by public policy or by their kind of political affiliations, but still wield the law in such a way that allows them to not necessarily rubber stamp, but to legally justify the infringements of people's rights. And we're seeing that. We've seen that in Alberta. There's a massive constitutional action right now. It's called the Ingram case.
Okay.
And it centers around a gym owner who basically opened up during the period in which gyms were shut down.
Yeah.
And it's the same arguments, right? Well, Costco can open, but you can't go to a gym.
Yeah.
You can.
Kenny apologized for that, by the way. Just in case you hadn't noticed.
Yeah, no, well, I know he did, but I mean, he's implemented the policy nevertheless.
Yeah.
So, and what's really interesting about this particular case is in all of our little regulatory COVID fines and in some of our larger actions, we've pled a whole bunch of constitutional arguments as well. All of those are getting put behind Ingram, and it's common knowledge, and the court has basically stated that they're going to use Ingram as the test case and the precedent-setting case to attempt to provide guidance to the legal system on how COVID regulations interact with charter rights.
Okay. Is it the Canadian civil liberties that's running that case?
It was the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and a law firm out of Pritis, Alberta called Rath and Company. One of my really good friends.
That guy does a lot of media too. I think
Jeff Rath. He mostly deals with Aboriginal land rights issues, and he's a fantastic lawyer. He has been. He kind of specializes in representing Indian bands and First Nations against the government of Canada in land rights claims.
he has a distinct provision within the charter to back him up. Your average citizen does not.
No, and that's true. But I would argue that there are distinct provisions in the charter and in the Constitution and in the common law that kind of rail against governments shutting down businesses or arbitrarily shutting down some businesses and not other businesses. Forcing people to disclose medical information that in all other circumstances is private.
Yeah.
It's arbitrary, I would say, that they're saying, okay, well, for this particular strain of influenza, this is just, the disclosure, the privacy doesn't apply to this, but it applies if you've got AIDS, or if you've got, a mental disability, or if you've got, if you went to a therapy because you've had some mental health issues.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting. But I would also say on the flip side, because people go, well, insurance companies can't ask you particular questions. That's not necessarily true. And a good example of this is I was actually getting an insurance policy. For critical illness and disability and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I've got a business to run, and if I run into a tree on the ski hill, I'd would like some surety, and I'm willing to pay for that, and that's a contract with an insurance company. In order for me to get that insurance, I had to submit to what I would consider to be a fairly invasive evaluation of my medical profile.
Yeah.
That, I would be offended and taken aback if some government organization were to force me to disclose that to them. But for me to receive the benefit of this insurance policy, the insurance, and quite frankly, I wouldn't force the insurance company to insure somebody that refused to provide information that literally has an impact on their ability to assess the risk of giving that person a policy. So it's competing interests. But again, the big distinction here is what I was involved in with the insurance company is a mutually beneficial, voluntary contractual exchange where they had a product. I wanted to get the product. One of the conditions on me obtaining that product was to provide them with the information that they need to conduct a risk assessment to determine whether or not that is a contract that they want to enter into. The government is different.
Well, getting on a plane isn't.
Well, no, exactly. And this again is where we get into the issue of whether or not
accessing a business isn't.
I completely agree.
So, so you're saying you're pro-vax? That's all I heard.
I'm not saying that I'm pro-vax.
You love it.
No, that's not necessarily true. I'm an ardent advocate in people being in control of medicine involving their body and in the property in their person. That's paramount to me.
So why do you think in times of real or convenient states of emergency, do you think that we hold tightly to special rules of exemption like religion? Like it's against your religious beliefs. So, no one would think it'd be decent, even with a declaration of a state of emergency and the notwithstanding clause, there's a scenario in which, Trudeau could be like, everybody's got to eat a slice of bacon. Everybody. In order to keep these kids safe, you got to eat this bacon. And some people are like, well, man, God forbid it. Like it says right here. Like I can literally show you where he said don't
well
eat.
and this is the overarching issue and the main problem, right? Is when somebody else has decided, or when somebody else has been given the authority to make the decisions about what they believe is best for somebody else. And again, I don't necessarily agree with that, but not only do you kind of engage legal and constitutional principles and rights, but you also engage, like an evaluation as to whether or not, I don't know, the evidence is necessarily there to support the assertion that this is for the public good. The arguments have been put out there that, COVID, while obviously affecting people and, being pretty dangerous if you're old or if you suffer from comorbidities or, under certain circumstances, if you're, maybe genetically predisposed to getting like hammered by the influenza.
It's real and it kills people.
That's right. But I mean, by the same token, and this is where the element of arbitrariness and capriciousness comes in, is people, often accept the risks of getting in their car and, we're basically just smart monkeys behind the wheels of these speeding refrigerators on wheels.
Murder machines.
Yeah, I mean, well, and I mean, I get in a car every day and I'd consider myself to be a pretty awesome driver, but, by the same token, this is the never ending struggle is between, individual rights and the purported public good, which in many aspects is subjective to the person that is. Well, and this is what's brutal is what is for your good is usually subjective.
Yeah.
If I want to, have a cigarette, well, I might get some benefit from that. I mean, it's clearly unhealthy for me. It's probably horrible.
You would look fucking cool.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe that's it, and maybe that's the benefit, and that is a subjective good. And really, at the end of the day, I don't think it is necessarily for someone else to tell me whether or not I can smoke a cigarette or decide to sit all day and play Xbox instead of going for a run, or drive a car, or maybe drive a motorcycle, which is likely more dangerous than driving a car.
I think this is a byproduct of like when you make public systems, like public healthcare. And the Americans still do this. They're like, oh, you're going to overwhelm the healthcare system. They're very worried about these private healthcare systems. And I was like, last time I checked, they fucking love when more people come in. Are you kidding me? It's awesome. I thought it was so evil because it was for profit, yet you're concerned that they're going to, have too many clients?
And this is the issues that these issues are so tremendously complex. And
I would make the argument that if they had a reasonable expectation that the healthcare system would be overrun, overtaxed, or did not have that it was so crucial that people get vaccinated that we would enter into the legal system and potentially violate people's charters rights, or we would maybe build some more emergency beds.
Well, turns
out after 18 months, 250 will do it for the province.
What do you mean 250?
258 is what they list specifically, and I had to do a bit of reading on this because there's a difference between what is referred to as an ICU bed, because they always mention how many people are in ICU. So, for example, right now we have about 150, something like that. Yeah, it's a big number when you look at the fact that there's, by their quotation, I believe it was a CBC article, 258 ICU beds available province-wide. The province says we have about 1,000 plus acute care beds, which are 95.6% free, and we have over 1,000 emergency care slots, and that's the wording on the IHS site, which is also 95% free. But for some reason, we're canceling nurses' vacations, and we're canceling surgeries. We're canceling cancer pre-screenings. We're canceling, a bunch of stuff. But we didn't build more ICU beds.
Yeah. So one thing that I learned also as a lawyer, and I learned this especially from the senior lawyer that I've been working with for a long time, who you know as well, and who I respect as probably one of the most learned dudes I've ever come across, and he's an amazing litigator and lawyer in his own right, is especially during this really cropped up in our discussions more on a personal level, because we've both got an interest in politics surrounding the purported election fraud in the States in the Trump and Biden election. Yeah. And politically speaking, people kind of pick their sides, right? And they're like, oh, I don't know, there's dubious motivations here. I don't know about those voting machines. Yeah. And people are like, oh, no, if you hate the voting machines, you're just kind of a Trumper who's, there's competing political dialogue. Yeah. And one thing that really kind of dawned on me, that was the wisdom that was imparted on me by the senior counsel was, look, son, we have to, as lawyers, we have to evaluate the evidence before we come to a conclusion. Mm-hmm. And just because you've seen or have been made aware of, or because some of the evidence has revealed itself, that doesn't mean that you've seen the entire picture. So you need to be careful about coming to a conclusion on something if you haven't been made aware of all of the evidence. And obviously, it's impossible to. You could spend eons evaluating even the most simplest, thing. Like, well, why aren't there enough ICU beds? I mean, man, the amount of data there that you might have to troll through to actually make a proper determination of why there aren't enough ICU beds. This could go to nurses' wages, could go to Yeah, it could go to electricity costs for the hospitals, or like maybe, you know, how many, maybe there's like, maybe people calling sick too much, or maybe there's gambling problems. I mean,
Infinite resources, infinite funds, a motivated group of individuals that are unionized, and a politician or a political class who is motivated specifically
Of course.
to provide to do things that are almost reprehensible in the name of health and safety, are not taking are not making the maximum amount of effort to provide ICU beds for the greatest killer our generation has ever known.
yeah.
I don't need evidence. I need reason.
Well, that's the whole thing. Is I think that they're not altogether unrelated. I think that the reasons stem from evidence, and evidence isn't the end all be all. You still have to come to a determination using logic, reason, and evidence is just one helpful piece to a larger intellectual puzzle that allows you to appropriate knowledge or come to a conclusion on to a particular kind of a question, I suppose.
You sound like a filthy statist.
I'm not, man.
Fucking love them.
Yeah, well, not really, not really.
No,
but
it's true, because there is a insane amount of disinformation and
and that's what's so alarming, and this is why I'm talking about evidence, is when we're going, okay, there's not enough ICU beds, and people immediately go, oh, it's because COVID is out of control.
No, they said it's full, and then you go like, well, how much is full?
And that's it, right? And that's, I think, more where senior counsel's kind of wisdom comes into play, is dig deeper and ask more questions, and don't take everything on face value. And especially, you also need to question the positions of other people who may not have motives that are aligned with yours. For example, mainstream media. I mean, it's just a big thing. Like, all these guys are getting a whole bunch of subsidies from the government. Are they going to be impartial when they're criticizing the government?
To quote a judge, you would hope.
Yeah, you would hope so. And that's not to say that, there's probably not, some guy that works for CBC who, who still espouses the tenets of ethical journalism, and who, looks back to like...
They must exist.
I mean, there's got to be. Like, I can't imagine that the CBC is just full of like statist, hard statist partisan hacks. Like, I can't see it. No. But that's one of their big problems is, I mean, there was a big debate, and I had this debate with opposing counsel on a particular federal court file, where I was labeling CBC as state-sponsored media.
Yeah.
And she had labeled them as a public broadcaster.
Yeah.
And what's really funny is, I mean, quite frankly, the distinction is fairly ridiculous. But it
depends on whether you acknowledge what's the CRTC is or not.
State-sponsored media sounds authoritarian and, like kind of a propaganda machine, whereas a public service broadcaster sounds like just a bunch of guys that are they've got this altruistic.
They could never partake in propaganda,
right? So, I mean, everything's got spin, and as a lawyer, while I've got, kind of my own ideology and my political persuasions, I'm always open to being persuaded otherwise. And this is another very important thing that I learned as a lawyer when I first became a lawyer, and you'll find this interesting as well, and I think you'll agree, is I would often, in argumentation and taking a position, I would often get myself into positions where I'd back myself into a corner, and I'd say, I'm right, you're wrong, let's duke it out.
Yeah.
And through that process, I would be shown that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And it makes it real hard to back out of that corner.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I learned is I will take positions, extremely strong positions, to the point where I'm even willing to go to war to fight for those positions.
Yeah.
However, I always leave the possibility open that I am incorrect in my assessment of of that particular issue, and I'm always willing to be shown that I am not correct. Does that make sense?
I think there's moral assertions that I can make that I will, no matter the amount of evidence, you couldn't change my mind.
Yeah, but I'm not necessarily
The
talking
Greeks
about.
thought it was okay.
I'm not necessarily talking about things like, okay, well, murder is wrong. Like, okay, I'm open to the idea of being, shown evidence that murder is awesome.
Well, I mean, preventative. Like, if we have some psychic people that we keep in a tube, and Tom Cruise does it.
Yeah, but I mean, think about this. So, if you take the position that that okay, like killing another human being is wrong, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess ethically and morally speaking, it depends on the circumstances. What if that human being has been infested with the zombie disease and he's coming to get you?
Then it's not murder. He's not a person.
Okay, so now we're getting into semantics and definitions and everything.
Brutal.
And this is the never-ending problem, is that we're just smart monkeys that are have developed a fairly fallible language to try to express ideas, and that language is always open to being.
You sound like you need to go to church.
No, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. And hey, you know what? I don't. I think I think religion and belief and all that stuff has an important role to play in the lives of many people. I'd like to consider myself I consider myself spiritual in one way or another.
Yeah. But if more than 50 people show up in a room, they got to go.
Well, I don't know.
You got to shut it down.
Well, I mean,
Shut it down.
Like for whatever reason, right? Like, are they shopping for TVs at Costco, or are they, coming together to, pray for,
It's a form of worship.
Yeah, I
These
mean,
sales are.
it's pretty crazy. But this is where we get
We're-
back to the issues
we're
of
talking-
arbitrary and capriciousness, right? So you can't get together to pray, but you can get together to shop for a big screen.
It's 50% off.
That's, I mean, I don't know. It's very alarming, and this is what strikes me the most is I don't know how any reasonable person can look at the arbitrary way in which these restrictions have been applied to some groups and not to others. Doesn't smack of unreasonableness and like an illogical.
I don't believe there's enough cultural will to illustrate how they were unequally applied.
But do you not think that this is also kind of more of like a anthropological part of the human condition where? I mean, we're kind of. I mean, this is nothing new, right?
Yep.
Like, hysteria.
Everybody gets a turn on the wheel, dude.
Well, right, and I mean, whether or not that's hysteria over, some pop star on some reality TV show, or some pandemic, or some political cause or something. There's always going to be. People who do things despite there's going to be people who do things despite the fact that it might not be rational or logical, or moral or ethical or legal.
Yeah, I think it's our which kind of. Here's a good one. What responsibility do you think citizens of Canada actually like? Not what you think. What currently under the law, what responsibility do Canadian citizens have to one another under the law? So they have a duty of care.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. So there's statutory duties and there's common law duties that have been passed down by the court. So yeah, there's a duty to care to one another. There's a duty to abide by the legislation in accordance with the way the legal and political framework that our country has been set up.
No.
I mean,
Do you think a draft is reasonable during times of war?
I'm not a draft guy.
No.
I don't support
I think it depends on what the draft's for.
well, I don't know. Like I
You
don't I would consider that to be fundamentally involuntary servitude, and I don't know how you'd fit the circle into the square.
It's for killing aliens.
Okay, yeah, and maybe that's a different thing, but I don't know. A draft, I don't know. Like it's
The reason why I ask it, and as it relates to vaccines, is this, and I thought, I touched on this a couple episodes back, which is, I, I, I suffer all the potential harms, and my situation, like I don't feel like I owe it to other people to, um, use something that has been emergency authorized.
yeah. So well, now we're getting more into the like the actual analysis of the evidence and the science and the research. And
Do you think that stuff will ever be brought up in court? Like, is it possible? Because
oh yeah,
anytime,
in Ingram it will be. So this is going to come out. I mean, the Alberta government in
like,
Ingram is going to be putting up medical experts, and they're going to get cross-examined.
thank fucking God, because
Are all the necessary questions going to get asked? We're going to see. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't think that they will be. And frankly, if I'm able to apply as an intervener because this is going to get appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, I'm telling you.
yeah,
If I have the opportunity and if I'm instructed by one of my clients, I will certainly be applying for an intervener status to try to take part in the appellate proceedings.
yeah.
And I mean, am I a perfect lawyer? I don't think so. Like, I think I'm a pretty good lawyer, but yeah. So there are lawyers who are what I would consider to have less proficiency,
Yeah.
and maybe in some cases they're fairly poor lawyers.
Yeah.
I think there are mediocre lawyers, and then I think there are good lawyers and great lawyers. When a case gets put before an adjudicator, you're never going to have the time or the resources to explore every angle and uncover every stone.
That's what we need tribunals for.
Yeah, and I mean, to a degree, but I mean, even in this Ingram case is going to affect the constitutional rights of everybody in Alberta, and if this goes to the Supreme Court, it'll eventually affect the rights of all of Canadians. Insofar as the facts of or the fact patterns of other scenarios relate to what has happened with COVID.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get in there, to be frank, to ensure that there's a degree of thoroughness that is applied to the process. And
I like that at least that stuff will be brought up in court, because like the amount of disparate data, because it is ongoing and the data shifts constantly, and you can Mark Twain that shit any which way, because they're like, oh, it's not so bad if you look at people over 70s. This shit's awesome. And it's just like, well, okay, but I'm not 70.
I don't know. Really, I guess we just have to see what kind of comes out in the wash. And will it be right? I don't know. I mean,
We'll see.
I guess we'll see.
So probably the last one that is worth asking is why does there seem to be a pipeline between the legal profession and members of parliament, like being an MP or an MLA or running for public office? Why is that like a thing? Granted, a substitute teacher is rising quickly as the preferred choice of a background for Canadian politicians. But there does seem to be an awful lot of lawyers getting involved in politics. I remember the last time I had to look at candidate lists when I was when I lived downtown. Every single one was a lawyer.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I have had many discussions throughout our friendship. I think there's obviously a level of ambition and intelligence and kind of attraction to intrigue and all that sort of stuff that might be kind of might be common to lawyers and people who want to become politicians. Obviously, when you get into politics, and especially if you're able to form a government or get into a position where you become a legislator, you need to, well, I mean, maybe you don't, but I mean, obviously having a grasp of legal theory, legal principles, an understanding and ability to interpret, legal frameworks is probably something that will help. I mean, it's all judges are lawyers.
No.
I mean, that's more of a function of the way that our legal system is set up and the way that judges are appointed.
That seemed to make sense, but the part where it's been called show business for ugly people, I think usually ends up being a pretty good analysis. But
that is a pretty good analysis.
Yeah, I think you can attribute it to good intentions, which is to say that these people have a civic spirit and that they have the means to do so. Or you can think the other side, that they become addicted to stature and power. And you have it's almost like a Pokemon form where you're just like, are you going to turn into a judge or a politician? Like, which way are you going to go? And he's just like, well, I'm a mediocre lawyer, so I think I'm going to go politician, And somebody who's like a good lawyer, they're like, look, I have a judicious mind. I'm going to be the real power class in Canada. So,
I mean, the position of a lawyer, really, in Alberta specifically, is that you are a member of the law society, that you're a member of the fraternity, the society that the law society that has been basically given a mandate by the government to regulate the profession. But what I've noticed, and what is, I'm sure what everybody out there kind of recognizes, is that everybody discusses the law. Everybody discusses politics. Everybody discusses philosophy and sociology. And I mean, being a lawyer is more so just a job. And just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean you're going to be a great politician.
My factory makes justice instead of widgets.
Yeah. So, but get this. I mean, I know a ton of people who would have made fantastic lawyers, but they just don't have a bar card. Mm-hmm. So I think that having a thirst for or an interest in the law is more of a kind of an intellectual and philosophical pursuit, and it touches on everything. It touches on
why do so many of them turn into politicians?
But I mean, not all lawyers are altruistic. People who have, noble motivations for the public good. I mean, there's a lot of, clearly politicians are corrupt. I mean, most of them are corrupt. I'd say.
I don't even know if that's the malice, the malice stupidity test. And I think it bends more towards, egotistical, like ineptitude. I think most of them are just inept, not vicious.
Yeah, well, I think that could be the case as well. There's a lot of vicious politicians out there, though.
Not enough.
Yeah, that's probably true. But I mean, I don't really know why. It seems like kind of a natural path for some people to follow. They kind of go into law, and some people might just they might not be happy with private practice in a big firm. And if you're a lawyer, I mean, there's two things that you can do. You can either hang out your shingle or go work for somebody else. I mean. Big law or institutional law or, government law is not necessarily, everybody's cup of tea.
I think if Jim the Hammer Shapiro ran in my riding, I'd have to vote for him.
Yeah, maybe.
He's going to wring every penny out of those insurance companies.
I mean, I've thought about politics as well. I just don't know if that's necessarily an arena that I want to, take off my sandals and get into.
You seem to hold your colleagues in high regard more than the majority are in high regard. I don't believe you're going to be able to do the same in that field.
Oh yeah, I probably wouldn't, and I don't even think I've got an interest in getting into politics. I think it's I think it's a pretty dirty game, and everything's under the microscope. You can't please all the people all the time, so it's a stressful job. Law is very similar, but
I guess because the law has a winner and loser declared at the end of the trial. A winner and loser declared every 4 years in an election or something like that. But you can never win, really. Even King Ralph suffered low approval rates among his party, not among the people, but among his party.
Yeah, I'm kind of down on the entire gamut of political organizations in Alberta and in Canada, and I think that there's not enough common sense, there's not enough compassion, there's not enough neighborliness, and kind of just traditional folksiness. Some might call that like populism, but I think there's politics in Alberta is rife with cronyism and bad intentions.
Dude, if you put out a buffet, some pigs are gonna show up.
Oh, dude. Yeah. I'd be one of those guys.
No one gets the cheese platter at the buffet. Okay,
I'd be the first guy lined up at that cheese platter.
Give me the good stuff. You got something in the back there? I know. Bring it out.
I don't know. I think kind of just to sum up, I think that every little decision that we make in our day-to-day lives with our interactions with strangers, with our friends and family, in businesses and interacting with companies and everything else, I think that's the real way that people can affect change. I think running for government and everything, that's all, that's all good and well, but I think it's a pretty messy place to get into, and we've got a pretty short lifespan. We were talking about this earlier. I've got probably, if I'm lucky, 40 years on the docket, and then I'm dust. Yeah. And doing well and fixing everything. I don't know if that's something that one man or one woman needs to necessarily take on by themselves, but making somebody smile at the gas pump because he made a funny joke, and that maybe that guy you'll never see again.
Yeah,
those types of interactions are what color existence in a positive way, I think, and there needs to be more of that. And we're losing that with COVID and narking on your neighbors because they had their mom over for dinner.
But that makes me happy.
Well, yeah.
That makes me smile, and I post about it on Twitter about how much you deserve to die.
Yeah, if you want to be a jerk to other people, that is not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah, I think so.
I just want to say that this particular podcast was recorded in a beautiful wood cabin in central Alberta overlooking one of our fabulous lakes, and it was just a pleasure to hang out with you, man.
Yeah, man. This is picturesque. This is true Alberta. The last when we broke the quarantine and we snuck away to the to rural Alberta to record in secret, like a bunch of degenerates.
Yeah, you guys are cavalier.
Yeah, and come and take it.
I don't know, man. Being in a log cabin with a buddy talking about pontificating on the world is a good way to spend the afternoon.
It's truly a measure of wealth. Not only to have the free time to do it, but to have the people to do it with,
and the technology to be able to do it for cheap. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and to do it for no one to listen to.
I'm going to listen to it.
Okay. Okay.